to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching today's new video, which is all about how I date and how you can date your vintage clothing. So I'm going to give you 4 examples here of varying types of vintage clothing to date, including an antique 1920s silk wedding dress. Yes, I did just pause for dramatic effect, but you know, hello, 1920s silk antique wedding dress. Literally, if you've ever watched any of my videos, you know how much I love the 20s, and it has been a dream of mine to find one of these dresses, so I'm beyond excited about it. So, you know, I'm going to bring this out as much as I can, to be honest. And I want to show you how you can date it, so, you know, if you do find something like this along your vintage hunting travels, you know that you're getting the real deal and not a phony. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's date this vintage clothing. So I'm going to start with the easiest type of vintage clothing to date straight away, because there's so many good resources out online about brands. Now, when I mean brands, I don't necessarily mean just designer brands like Chanel and all Burberry and all that. There is excellent resources online. The best one that I love and trust, and I use this all the time, every day more or less, is a website called Vintage Fashion Guild. It is a free to use website. I'll link it down below in the description, and they have an excellent visual library, so they have like pictures of all different sorts of brands. So this dress here is a vintage Marks and Spencer's, when it focuses, jumper dress, cute, eh? Actually just got this today. So they will show you like all the different labels at Marks and Spencer's, or how this one is called St Michael's, from like the start of their career, so to speak, like from the start of when Marks and Spencer's was out. We'll use this as an example, and they'll show you visual examples. They'll tell you the dates of when it started, when it finished, and then they'll show you on to the next one. So if you have a brand like a high street brand like this one, or any of the big huge designer ones, or even some really hard and rare to find only vintage designer brands, like I recently found a Miss Mouse jacket. This is a real boutique, small, very highly collectible vintage brand, and you know, there's not loads of resources online, but this website has it on there. So if you have any sort of brands like this, go on that website and you'll be able to more or less date it straight away. If you can't, I would be very surprised. There has been a few times where, you know, I haven't been able to find what I'm looking for on this website, but just do your research. I always think that, you know, you can always tell if something is old or not from where it was made. So this is made in the UK. Unfortunately, we don't make many clothes here anymore, which is something I hope comes back here, because, you know, I always think it's a sign of quality, isn't it, if it's made in the UK or England. You can then tell by like the colours and the font and stuff used on the label. It's very old-fashioned, for lack of a better word, that sort of label, isn't it? And then another great way to tell is also by the material that the dress was made of. Now this is actually made from acrylic, so you know, that's not an old fabric. This is still used quite a lot in clothing today. Another great way to tell if you do have a label, because I do understand that sometimes there isn't a label in vintage clothing, which we'll get onto, don't you worry, is to actually look at the diagrams on the back of the label, and to see, when my camera focuses, there we go. Now, oh, it's not working, is it? Now, you can see here, this is the Care label. Come on, camera. Now, that is an old way to write a Care label. You'd never see that now on modern day clothing. So if you are in any doubt, check that out, and then from resources online you will be able to then give a decade, if nothing else. You know, I always think if you can give the decade, you can't really ask for more than that, so you'll be able to do that from that. So first stop, if you've got the brand label, it's really so easy to date things. Go to that website and you're set. If not, Google is your friend, as we all know that. But I would be very surprised if you couldn't find your brand label on that. I found 99% of the things I needed on there. And then you need to look at the materials used, and then the Care label if you can't date it still. Okay, so next. Now, for me, because I have obviously been running my own vintage shop for a few years now, you do get better at dating things straight off the bat. Like I can look at a dress and say that's 60s, that's 70s, and it's down to experience. Like the more that you do something, the better that you get. Your eye develops, and you know, you start to memorize all these things that, you know, I never had an idea about when I first started, and it just becomes second nature. So you know, you just need to be a bit patient with yourself while you build up your knowledge. But you know, if I can do it, so can you. So another good thing to know about is zips. Now, I know it's probably not the most exciting thing to tell you, but you know, it is true. Now, metal zips in clothing is a vintage thing because, let's face it, metal zips are chunkier, they're more expensive to make, so now in modern day clothing they're more likely to be plastic or nylon zips because they are more delicate, so they sort of tend to lend themselves better to, like in this dress, it's a zip on the back. So now, on a modern day equivalent, you'd have an invisible visible zip, which would be plastic or a man-made material. Now, this has a metal zip straight away. Even if I didn't know anything else about this dress, I could see from its placement in the back, that is going to be a vintage dress. Then I'm going to think, oh look, the material is, for lack of a better description, fleece-like almost, but very thin fleece-like. And then, if I couldn't see the print, so I'm just gone off the zip, metal, and the fleece-like material. Okay, yes, it feels very vintage to me. They've used a metal zip. This is probably going to be about a 60s dress in the back. Bearing in mind, zips in the back of clothing only originated in the 50s. So if you have that knowledge of like how technology progressed fashion, it really, really will help you. Now, I have learned everything that I know from just researching myself online, but these are the things that I think about instantly when I'm looking at a piece of clothing that I'm thinking about buying, how much I want to pay for it. So this is a great way to know what you should be paying for something, and then also how to date it. So we've just discussed the fabric, then obviously from the colours of this dress, the fact that it's short, long sleeved, this is a 60s dress. Now, I haven't even looked at the label yet to confirm this. So again, made in Hong Kong, nylon, and this is meant to be a size 16. Now, this is a great, great, great indicator of age. Vintage clothing in particular, in general, is at least 2 sizes smaller than modern day equivalent. That's because, you know, we've got bigger, and vintage clothing does run small, doesn't it? So this is a 16. I am a UK 8 on top, 10 on bottom, and I would say this is a size 10 dress. It would fit me nicely. So I can tell from the fact that the sizing is a lot smaller that this is a vintage item as well. Then the fabric is actually a nylon blend, and it has a very vintage label on it, which I'll show you now if my camera will play along. Oh no, there we go. There, and then another vintage label there. So from all these things, I can quite confidently say that this is a 60s dress. And very cool. Don't you just love that print? Hello, pop art. Or op art. Oh, you said it wrong, sorry. So there we go. So they're 2 quite easy things today, I think, you know, because they've got labels there and you have something to work off. And you know, the more information that you have or you can get from a label, the easier it is for you to date things, I think. Next, now, this. Actually, we'll do this dress first. Now, this dress has, well, it's beautiful, obviously. I really love the design. I love the fact that it's got pearl inlaid buttons to it, double-breasted fastening. It is fully lined throughout with that matching chocolate brown lining. Again, it has a back zip in it, and it has a cool flap detail to the front. Now, this dress has a label in it. Now, maybe not one that you might have heard of, but I have actually heard of it because I love looking at vintage labels, don't I? So this is California. I think you can instantly tell from a label, new or old. Let me just come closer so you can see this beautiful label. You can instantly tell, even if you had never heard of this brand before. Sorry, I know it's back to front too, but I have to be able to see what I'm doing, I'm afraid. I will add photos to my blog if you want to go and check it out in the right direction. Now, vintage labels in comparison to modern day labels, they are generally a lot more decorative in their design. They're usually embroidered. On here it's quite easy for me to just go whoop, oh yes, that has been embroidered. Now if you can imagine how much this would cost to make just the label, that is a good indicator that it's a vintage design, because this would cost a lot more to make than the printed versions that you tend to see in modern day clothing. As you can see here, I know it's quite different, so I do apologise again, it says made in England, and then it has the vintage style dry clean label on it. Now I wanted to show you this one in particular because unlike modern day clothing, vintage clothing, there was no legal rules that they had to add like what material the pieces of clothing was made from. There was no rules like that. You could just make something, you didn't have to put a single label in it if you didn't want to. I do believe that the rules for adding vintage label, material labels into clothing came in the 80s, I believe. So it's quite late on. So that is a good indicator. If you can't see a garment label in it for the composition of the fabric, that's an indicator that it is probably later than the 80s. Now this dress has a lot going on it. The design on it is 60s in its silhouette, short sleeveless little mini dress here, but we're going to look at the zip now. Now this has a plastic zip in it. That doesn't mean that it's not vintage, it means it was made at a later point. I would actually date this dress late 70s, and it's from everything that I know about the brand. The fact that it has no composition material in it, and the fact that you can then go onto that Vintage Fashion Girls website and look at the brand label. Now you're probably going to think, how can I then tell people what the material is and find out for myself? How do I wash it? I always think, if in doubt, hand wash it when it comes to vintage clothing, because you can't just nip out and find yourself another one, can you, willy-nilly? So if in doubt, hand wash it out. Now, because I have been doing this for quite a while now, I have a good sense of different materials, different fabrics. I know how they feel and how they hang. This has got a beautiful weight to it, this dress, and it hangs perfectly on, fully lined, and it's made from a quality vintage brand. I would say this is a cotton and linen blend with a man-made, probably acetate based lining in it. If you don't have the knowledge of like materials like I do, another good way to sort of do it if you're learning and really want to get your fingers and your eyes working for you is to compare it to something in your wardrobe that you do know is cotton, is viscose, is acetate, so you can then get the sense of the feel of fabrics, and that is really useful for when you need to like describe something, or if you are trying to date something as well. So that's what I would do. Now, don't worry, I'm going to get onto the 1920s wedding dress. Do not despair, it is coming your way after this coat. Now I want to show you this coat because I love the style of it. Who doesn't love a lovely, beautiful sort of opera evening coat, is how I would describe it, with a beautiful shocking pink lining throughout. It has a single hook and eye fastening, and this fabric and print. It's just delightful, I think. So I wanted to show you this one because this is probably one of the hardest ones to date. It has absolutely no labels in it at all. Nothing. Not a brand label, not a care label. It's been nicely made, but there's nothing on it at all. So you think, well, how do I know this is vintage? Where would you start with this one? Well, I'm going to tell you, obviously. So let me show you it on, if I can. So it is open frontage, like I said. And then it has a really cool neck detail here. So obviously not with an orange jumper and a tiger print dress, but you get the gist of where I'm going with this one. Okay, so where I would start it, I want to look at the silhouette. I want to see, go through my mind and think about all the different decades and what sort of style of clothing, sorry, the excitement is just too much for me to cope with, was around then, and that is a great starting point. So from the style of this coat, I'm just going to take it off so I don't clash the whole of our conversation. I I would say is 60s in its silhouette. It's mid-length. An evening coat is how I would describe it, because that is probably how it would have been worn. And with the necktie detail, it's very 60s in its styling. So that is a great starting point. Then what I'd like to look through, I would inspect it fully and just to check, you know, I want to check the seams. Has it been handmade? Has it been homemade? You can tell that from the way it was finished. So if it was made professionally, all the seams would be overlocked, or French seam where it's folded back on itself and you can't see any raw hems. This is raw hems on the lining on the inside and on the material, on the outer material as well. So I probably would say that this is handmade. Again, that is a good indicator, because in like years gone by, like at my grandparents' years, you probably as well, they used to make a lot of their own clothes because money was tight. You buy fabric and then you would make it yourself. So that's a good indicator to sort of see what sort of time period that we're still in, and which would still make me feel it was 60s. Now the next is looking at the material. As you can tell, it's been very nicely handmade. I would say from touching this, it's a textured material. I would say it's a wool blend. Now I like to use the word blend because, you know, I can't say with 100% that this is wool, because there's no labels for me to tell. From my experience of vintage clothing and fabric, how it feels, how it looks, how it hangs, I would say this is wool, and I'd confidently say this is wool as well. So, you know, wool blend is a nice way to put it, I would say. And then I would say that the lining is an acetate nylon, probably more nylon actually, lining. So I would still date this as the 60s from looking at it now, see how it looks on. Obviously I didn't show you very well, but I have taken photos of this jacket before, and just with its whole styling, I would say this is a late 60s evening coat. Sometimes that's all you can do with vintage clothing. I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. I think that's one of the beauties of vintage clothing, that pieces are one-off, so they are harder to date. So, now to what I know you have all been waiting for, and I do not blame you. Now, if you don't follow me on Instagram and TikTok, boy, have you been missing out a treat. Now, I have been posting my little mind off with this beautiful dress, and it has been going down a treat. So, obviously, 1920s clothing is very expensive because, you know, it's rare, isn't it? That's why things cost a lot, because they're hard to find, because they're old. Vintage clothing from this period is made from a lot of natural fabrics like silk, which are not harder to care for, you know, they don't always fare as well if they're not stored in the right conditions. So, you know, this is like 100 years old now, isn't it? Which just blows my mind to even say out loud. Now, it is a beautiful wedding dress, and it has the most amazing accessories with it, which I will show you in a second. So, now it does have missing beading on it, but I do not care because it is beautiful. Oh. Now, straight away from the silhouette, you can tell that it's 20s. It's got a drop waist design, pull over the head, which is in keeping for the time period, and then the beautiful beading to the front, which is Art Deco in its style. You know, that swirly print is very Art Deco with its design, and it's very sort of organic and free flowing. Then it has a more of a geometric design just above the gathered waistband there. So, as you can tell, it is beautiful. Now, one of the ways that is a great way to tell if something is vintage clothing on a piece this old. Now, actually, anything over 90 years is classed as antique. So this is 100 years old, so this is classed as antique clothing. So the little Brucey bonus fact for you there, I'm sure you knew it anyway, is to look at the thread. Yes, I know I've mentioned zips, and now I'm onto thread. Think about how much technology progresses, even in our lifetimes. Thread is, on antique clothing like this, is a lot thicker than the thread that we are used to seeing now. And don't pay any attention to. Why would you? It's the thread, it holds your clothes together. You don't necessarily see it, do you? On beading clothing like this, you see it because all this would have been hand beaded, has to go through the beads and in and out of the silk. So if you look very, very, very carefully, I don't know if I'll be able to show you this. I'll put some detailed pictures up onto the blog post so you can go and check it out. Now, let me see if I can show you, my friends. Zoom in. No, it's not the best of pictures. Now, let's see if this focuses. No, it's not going to focus, is it? Come on, camera. No. So I'll hold it there because that's all really as much as I can see. Maybe you could pause it and then zoom in yourself. The thread is a lot thicker than what you would find on a beaded dress today. You can actually quite clearly see it between like the joins where the beads meet up and go back in either end here, and it's quite, once you know to look for it, it is actually quite obvious almost. So that's a great way to see if something is actually what someone is telling you. Great. The next thing to think about is consider, you know, on a beaded dress like this, what are the beads made of? You're not going to get a sequin. Sequins were not around in the 20s. If you bought something or have something, or someone is telling you something that is, well, it's not good. No sequins in the 20s, basically, no. If you have a 20s dress, or someone is trying to sell you a 20s dress with a sequin on it, it is not a 20s dress, original one. It's a 20s style dress. No, no, no. So, bear that in mind. Also, bear in mind, you know, it's going to be antique silk. Like this is, you're going to have a few age marks on it, age spots even. Show you one on here. That is to be expected with something so old. And you're going to tend to have that sort of soft yellowy tone to it, like this does. Like, this could have been pure white. With age, the natural material tends to yellow over time. Completely natural. I don't think it deters from the beauty of it at all, but just bear that in mind. If you're buying something of this age, which is 100 years old, just to reiterate that, it should not look new. Now, it has beautiful detailings, like this little sort of bow on its sleeves, and then it actually has a popper on it. That's fine. Poppers were around in the 20s, that is fine. Another way to date something well is to undo the popper carefully, give it a little bit of extra support, and it should be larger, a little bit larger than you would think it would be, because again, as technology progresses, things get smaller, more delicate. So bear that in mind as well. Now let me show you an age spot. So the difference between age spot and just dirt is the fact that it's sort of, dirt sort of rests on the surface. This is actually like almost in the fabric. Yeah, so that is how you would date a dress like this. And then obviously silhouette, and bearing in mind all the information that you would already know about that period. Now, another great way for me to date this dress was it actually came with the most amazing vintage wedding accessories ever. Now, I knew this was the 20s already. I found it in a house clearance place in London. It's dreamy, that place. And it came with a classic 1920s a handmade wax crown, tiara. How amazing in it. The whole thing of this is 20s through and through. The way it sits there on your head, handmade. This is a great way to tell from the construction of it by looking at the undergarment. It is very delicate because it is wax. The fact that it has survived is amazing. Now I'm just going to just kneel down so I can show you things in more detail. So it came with a wax flower corsage as well, the same sort of style, and then you can turn it over and see how it was constructed on the back. Beautiful, and it's so simple in its design, but I would imagine this was going to be worn on the chest of the dress, or you know, maybe even the groom wore that to compliment his bride. Next we have some most amazing little wax bracelet. Ooh. So pretty, again, you know, worn the bride. Just love this. So amazing that this has all survived. And then also, it has survived, so I don't want to be the one to make it not survive. This would have been worn by a little flower girl or bridesmaid. 1 second, I'm having an issue. A little rose floral crown. Imagine little bridesmaids wearing that, can't you? So cute. And then check out how tiny these little white leather gloves are. Again, beautiful button detailing on the back of them. So soft and so small. I do have large hands, but these are really tiny. So, and then they've got a mark and the size written inside of them. Size 6.5. Also known as kid size. Tiny, 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 tiny. So there you go. That is how I date my vintage clothing, and that is how you can date your vintage clothing. The more that you do it, the more that you research your vintage designer brands, know little details about how until 2000 Burberry was Burberry's with S on the end. Just these little things, little tips that you pick up along the way, you'll be on your path to know absolutely everything there is to know about vintage clothing and how to date it. I hope you found this video useful and interesting and you liked some of my finds. Obviously I know you like this wedding dress, how could you not? Thank you so much for watching me. My name is Rachel Sadler and this has been a video for Ada's Attic Vintage, and I shall see you very soon. Goodbye!